The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the study group for Tuesday, the 28th of July. And today, I've got with me Jeff Campbell, and I should also have on the line Jason, or he should be joining us very shortly. Jason, are you there on the line?
Yes, Judith.
Hey, that's great to hear you. So you probably haven't met Jeff Campbell before, but you can both see a photo of each other on the screen there.
Fantastic.
Yeah, good morning, Jason. I don't think we have met, but I have heard about you, mate. Yeah.
Oh, well, I'll apologise up front.
No, not necessary. Welcome, Jason. It's great to have you on board. We were hoping to have someone, each day a bit fresh and new each time. So it's great to have you. We had Brian last week, Brian Warburton. I think he's listening in again this, so I hope Brian's there as well. So happy to have you involved and help us through this process today. Thank you.
Lovely, thank you.
So Jason hails from Gympie and has been with the Savory Institute, I understand, since 2005. Is that correct, or am I misrepresenting you there?
No, that's fine, Judith. I started my training in 2003 in America and finally graduated in 2005 and have been accredited with both Savory Institute and HMI all that time.
That's amazing. So this week we're working through the ecosystems processes as part of the study process, and that is only the second little section in. So the first section that you work through is called the key insights, and the second one that we work through there is called the ecosystems processes, or speaking the language of the land. And guys, I'll try and keep an eye out, but if you'd like to ask any questions as we move through, or you'd like to share any of your own insights, definitely make sure you put a question there, and I'll keep the questions box open so I can keep a track of that, because that's great to get that feedback from people who are listening in on the line as well. Okay, so we're going to go and have a look at the ecosystems processes. I'm just going to show you the graphic, and this is straight from the course material, of the four processes, or three processes and one flow really: the water cycle, mineral cycle, energy flow, and the community dynamics. And just briefly have a look at the first question from the course. And so you've given this sort of reflection or context that we're to take our thinking from. So think of a piece of land you're familiar with and consider important to you. It should be a site you know, or an extended length of time. Describe the biological biodiversity and ground cover present when you first saw it. Remember to consider the different plants that are on the land and their various ages, from a seedling to dead and decaying. Also include animals, from the smallest of rodents to grazing or browsing creatures, to predators, to birds, to insects. And to have a look at then you ask to answer the following questions. So the first question: how has that land changed in ground cover and biological diversity from when you first saw it to today? And guys, we probably could have asked some people to send in photos. I've got a photo of Dreamland. I was born on Dreamland, so there's 40 years of knowledge of this particular valley, which is just behind our house. I've seen it in a lot of different seasons. I've seen it in extreme drought, and I've seen this photo taken quite recently in January after a big section of or quite a lot of summer rain. So looking lovely and green, one of my favourite photos of it. So I guess, we can reflect on those sort of things. Jeffrey, I didn't ask you for a photo of Karawara, and Jason really hasn't had a chance to contribute a photo, but have you guys got something that you're keeping in mind that you're going to use as your comparison there, Jeff?
Yes, Judith. I have at Karawara, and it's been a place that you've seen also, that where the airstrip was there, that was all covered in galvanised burr. Was one of the early bullock paddocks where a lot of the cattle used to come in, wait to be droved off, of course, in the early days, and it was just covered in galvanised burr. and now it's sort of basically improved to it's just pretty well solid muffle and stuff in there now, pretty well good perennial grass there now, which you've seen. So that is my place that I'm thinking of, yeah. It's amazing how that can turn around with different grazing management, I guess. It's all to do with over-rest and continual grazing was the problem there, yeah.
That's awesome. Jason, have you got any, you've got some land that you own there in Gympie. You must have a position that you're thinking of.
Yes, Judith, we've got 76 acres over here between Noosa and Karoi, and it's a relatively high rainfall zone, rainfall area. The property's been destocked for 15 years that we know of, and it's gone back to a fairly dense woodland of black wattle and the like. And we're setting in the process of setting up monitoring sites, so as we reintroduce grazing animals to this area, we can keep a photographic record. I'd like to think I'm going to be keen enough to take a photo every week, but that might not happen, because even in this rather non-brittle tending environment, rest does play a huge factor on the soil surface. And I was only just doing some fencing repairs 2 or 3 days ago, and I'm noticing places where the grass has retreated or disappeared and moss has come in. And you know, people like to think that over here on the coast it rains all the time and growing grass is pretty easy. Well, that's not always the case on every piece of land over here. So much like your photo there of home, I can relate to that.
That's interesting. So we're going to go through just a little section on the water cycle. Just, you know, basically when I was reflecting about this question, I was thinking about this activity, which Alan Savory does with the Sazinda community that he works with over in Zimbabwe, and this is something that they've been putting forward as one of the, I think he does it with most people, but it was something that was fairly new in the way that he demonstrated it. So I've taken a couple of clips, and this is on YouTube. So here he has three squares drawn out on the ground with a stick, and he really does wear no shoes most of the time. It's much too many prickles around our place. I've decided to even contemplate wearing no shoes. But you notice that's Alan Savory's legs in the video there. He's not my chicken legs, it's his chicken legs. And there's 3 plots grown on the ground. One, all the land was similar when he first started, and he's got these 3 squares on the ground, and one he leaves as, you know, doesn't do anything to it. This middle one here, he's sort of roughed it up a bit, like as if some animals have trodden across it, disturbed it quite a lot. And the one over on the left, he's done the same thing to it, and then he's added a whole lot of grass or straw on the top of it, so it's got some ground cover there. And the next thing that he does is he adds some water. And Jeffrey, just before we were discussing this, Jeffrey was remembering about how you pour the water on from a Coke can. Well, he's pouring it on here from a 1 litre water container, and he reckons it's about equal to a 4 millimetre fall. But Jeffrey, you just say again what you said about the Coke can.
Yeah, I remember an experiment we used to do in the early days when we started with this holistic stuff to sort of demonstrate the same thing, I guess, was water runs at a constant speed out of a Coke can. And I wouldn't know how much rain that would be like, but if you just tip it out on bare ground and measure the square centimetres, roughly measure the square centimetres that it wets, and then go on to covered ground, of course, and if you've got real covered ground, well, it'll hardly reach the ground. But like on the bare ground, it's just like dropping it on the kitchen floor. It just runs and wets a big area. So it just demonstrates how much cover, or we were mainly doing it on grass paddocks, and how you know, it's easy to underestimate what healthy perennial plants can absorb and hold. You know, like sometimes a Coke can would need to get to the soil. That amount of rain would be just stored and maybe get down there later on, but just straight away it wouldn't be there, so you wouldn't wet any ground. And other areas that would wet, you know, centimetres up to a metre.
Yeah, so you can see on the right-hand side of the photo where it didn't have any disturbance to the soil, the water's staying on the top, and it's running it looks like it's running over towards the right a little bit. Jason, is this something that you do fairly regularly?
Yeah, Judith, I haven't gone to that extreme of doing this in class, but I've got a class coming up in Mundubbera in not this coming weekend, but the next, and we're going out onto someone's farm for the grazing planning session, and I'll be wanting to use this because even I note in Alan's photo there, it's a piece of land that is rather bare. There's no litter or there's no growing plants, but even if you found a piece of soil in our area that had a very low density of plants, you could replicate this example very, very easily, and it's wonderful when you do this for people as an illustration of what the water cycle looks like. And it's just a lovely little tool because then they can see what's going on, and you could probably do it before lunch or do it at morning tea time and then come back out at lunchtime an hour or so later, and you'll get a much more dramatic effect that the piece of land on the very right hand side of the photo, the water won't have soaked in very far. Where he's chipped it, it would have soaked in further, and where he's chipped it and covered it with litter, most of the moisture will still be present. So it's just a wonderful little way for illustration.
Yeah. So he does come back, I don't know how long this is, but after it's dried off, and he does consider it. And so, this is the plot on the right. And yeah, the water hasn't gone in very far, but also I've got this is something that I learnt from Helen and Brian. The way, when that cover is just like that with no plants and it's very even like that, when the water falls on it, what happens is the droplets come up in this little spray formation and they actually fall down again, and that's how in our country it caps off, so that that's how that cap falls, and I found that really interesting. The other slide I'll put up is what happens when the soil temperature comes up in what happens when you don't have any coverage like that. The surface of the soil will be very hot. So this is an American slide. It's up over 100 degrees there, into around 130 or so. All the moisture will be lost through evaporation and transpiration, which is exactly what happens in summer. But then up further around the 140 degrees Fahrenheit, all the soil in the soil bacteria actually die. So that's why it's difficult when you have got that bare ground, because what happens is it really does bake. So when he moves over into the middle slide, he digs a little bit, and of course because of the indentations, the moisture is soaking in a little bit, but still it's not really nothing growing there yet. So over a period of time, things might settle in those little hoof prints, or you might get things growing. And then where he actually has the soil coverage, I just can't believe how the soil kind of even looks darker in this photo, even though when he starts with the bare ground it's all the same colour, and you can put your hands together and get the soil to actually ball up together. So that's his demonstration. And I've played a little bit with also just measuring the soil temperature on the surface, where you've got no leaf matter and no plants on one side, and then you've got on the other side, you've got plants, green plants, and actually it makes a big difference to the surface of the soil, what that temperature is. And that's really important, I think, particularly in our country where it's so hot, and where you're trying to get things to grow in the summer, which is when you get most of the rain. The other thing about the water cycle that I found was this experiment. I don't know, Jeff says that he hasn't seen this one done for real. Jason, have you tried out this experiment with you put the soil into, so you have 2 Coke bottles basically, and the bottom is cut off them, so you actually use 4 Coke cans, 4 Coke bottles, and you've got 2 bottoms, so you've got 2 reservoirs and holes in the bottom of there, and you've got any soil, obviously the soil has to let some water through, and you pack it in a fair bit. And then on the left hand side it's got no cover at all, but on the right hand side it's got this dead plant material on the top, and it's got a little jug or a little outlet to allow the water to come out. And so you run this experiment, put the same amount of water in the top of each one, and on the left-hand side, of course, the water comes out with a whole lot of runoff, so you get a whole lot of really, brown-coloured runoff, and quite a lot, and no water going into the groundwater recharge at the bottom. It'll want to actually just run off. Whereas on the right-hand side, where you've got all the plant material, you'll get a little bit of runoff, which will be much clearer, but you'll also get groundwater recharge, which is there in the bottom of the Coke container there, actually processing down, and it's because the plant material is holding all that water on the surface there and allowing it to soak into the soil. So I was thinking of setting up an experiment, maybe put it in the front of the land care office here to play around with it, because I think it's an interesting demonstration where people can see right in front of their eyes what happens when that water runs off, which is exactly what happened to us in December, and when we had 240 millimetres of rain in December. Most of it ran off and down the creek in that dirty coloured water over on the right-hand side. And really what we want to be happening is that clear coloured water and recharging the springs and groundwater beneath. And I'm taking you back to a photo from from Zimbabwe, and this is the creek that runs along the back of where Alan actually lives on the ranch, and it's got this clear water, and that's really what he's on about all the time, is that water that is in the creek is the clear runoff, because he's got a lot of ground cover on his place, and that's really what I'd like to have in our creek is much more clear water rather than having a whole lot of brown water runoff. So that's what I think of when I talk about the water cycle. Jeff, you were there with me, so...
Yeah, Judith, I think you've got some good examples there. I'm just thinking of the example in the book that Alan, in the book that he wrote, and he says about, when you said about the summer rain, made me think of it when you got your summer storms. It's often the runoff, we lose a lot with runoff too, but also between the showers, like there could be 2 or 3 weeks, and the bare ground evaporates so much as well. So we lose it at both ends, even if a bit does go into the bare ground, it evaporates before the next shower comes, like it might be 10 days time or whatever. So we're starting from scratch again, whereas if you've got the ground covered and a bit will run off, I guess could do, but it might be clean water, and then it also fills up, starts to fill up the water table, not so much the water table, but the soil surface. Doesn't evaporate out as quick as well. So the soil, it's amazing, again, soil moves upwards through water. That was something I got out of this as well, like a plant that'll bring it up, but even the moon that affects the tide and that sort of stuff, it can bring water up through soil. And evaporation, of course, is one of the ways. As the top dries out, the water moves up from deep down in the profile and evaporates out quite rapidly, yeah.
That's great. I've got a question, but it's not really a question. It says, I'm still coming, but I'm muted by organiser. I'm not sure if that's Brian that's giving me that message. I'll see what I can do about that, if you give me a moment, Brian. Any other comments about the water cycle, Jason?
Judith, having been to Africa and seeing it when it was in a less advanced state than it obviously is now, even in our high rainfall areas over here on the coast, this soil cover is so critical if we want to rehydrate the landscape. There's really no other method that we can use to get water into the soil. And I know the Queensland, respective state governments and the national government are quite concerned about the amount of runoff that's leaving the state and entering the ocean and the Great Barrier Reef. But we've tried every other method to get water into the soil, and it just doesn't work. It's so critical that we keep a body of green growing plants and a mixture of litter or dead plant materials, so that every square inch of our land is covered, so that when the rain falls, it soaks in exactly where that raindrop hits the earth. We don't want movement of water across the landscape in any way, shape or form, because once it starts moving, it's pretty pretty difficult to stop it. And it's what it does is it's moving across the landscape. It's the problem. So, you know, this thing of getting the water into the soil where it falls is critical, and the only way we can do that is to have that soil covered with green and brown plant material all the time. And, you know, that only happens when we start recognising how we can grow plant material and keep it in the landscape.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, great, Jason. I think there's a good example in the book about reading the soil surface to see how your water. So if people wanted to have a look at that, see how your water cycle's working, learn to read the soil surface, and there's a good couple of good parts in the book about that. So that's what we learned to do. You know, we don't really need satellites and an expensive bit of gear. We just need to get out and have a look down on the soil, right at the soil surface, and see what the water cycle's doing.
Yeah, and as our dear friend Bruce Ward used to say, it's not looking across, it's looking down. I mean, you know, in the past I've been guilty of most graziers where we drive through the farm and we're just enjoying the drive, and we glance out the window and we see a field of waving plants dancing in the breeze, and we think, by heck, there's a lot of grass there. But unless you get out of the car and you walk into the landscape and you look down, it can be very, very deceiving. And we notice this particularly with people that are new to planned grazing, and in that first few months or that first 12 months after they've changed what's happening, you do get a change in the volume of feed, and it looks impressive at a distance, but the density of the plants is still not there yet. You know, it's a classic example over here when we finish mowing the lawn in April or May and things have slowed down, a lot of the lawn grasses race to seed, and you could be excused if you didn't know what you're looking at of thinking it's a rather healthy community. Well, you've got all this tall stolon which has just got a seed on it, and it looks impressive, but there's not really any more bulk. So this is why it's so critical to understand what a healthy stand of plant material looks like, and unless you actually get out there and look down into it, you can be very easily mistaken.
Yeah, that's great.
Judith, just a comment too. When we first started doing this in a brittle environment, we found it relatively easy to get ground cover with litter, but it actually just sat on the soil. It didn't break down. And as you get further into this, the microbial stuff, and we haven't really got so many earthworms here, but on another property that we had up at Springshore, we had a lot of earthworms, and that country up there just ate litter. You'd have a lot of litter, but all of a sudden it just disappear, which is probably what we're going to talk about later on. But it's just always amazed me hearing this brittle stuff when we first started it. We thought we were doing pretty good with a lot of litter on the ground. I guess we were moving in the right direction, but we had to wait till the biological activity caught up and start putting some of that stuff. I think we only had white ant seeds to start with, but there seems to be other things working there now.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we're just going to move on to the next section, which is about community dynamics, which is what Jeff is alluding to. And think about, you know, for that particular piece of land, how would we be looking at the community dynamics? So in the ecosystem process, it's defined, the community dynamics are defined as increased diversity of all life forms in the community, which leads to a greater stability, deeper, more mature soils, and higher energy flow. So I found this interesting slide. It comes from some other presenters, but I just wanted to use it in this example just to show you. So we're looking at the soil surface, and on the left-hand side we're looking at a bare soil, and you can see at the bottom there it's a simple community, and it says it's got great fluctuation. And then over on the right-hand side it's covered soil and complex community, or you're getting stability there. And so when you look across the way that wiggly line goes, that's the degree of variation in populations. And we're seeing it right here at the moment in the winter, a whole lot of, you know, you get a lot of rain, and then you get a whole lot of a flush of big population in marshmallow, or big population in weed, or big population in galvanised burr, and nothing much else. Whereas over to the right-hand side, you know, you've got this plant volume, you've got more plant volume, more height in that plant volume, more microorganisms building the soil structure and depth, and more balance in your community. So you don't get this big seesawing effect of having a whole big boom in growth, and then you know, you get a whole lot of turnip or marshmallow or, you know, galvanized burr, and then it all goes, and you're back to not very much. So I felt that it was really speaking to me at the moment, because some of our very bare places have got that really big, you know, really big fluctuation in populations.
Yeah, good. Judith, I think yeah, you see this, of course, in probably areas, you know, diminishing sort of nutrient cycle, but and I always think it'd be easier to knock that out and get worse while you've got that big fluctuation, like on the left-hand side. If something happened there, some bit of a tragedy or something, it'd be so easy then to go backwards, declining succession or whatever. But when you've got the diversity and the less fluctuation, it was more, you know, say you did happen to get a fire or you did have to get a hailstorm or whatever, something happened there, it'd probably respond pretty quickly, and it wouldn't improve a lot quicker than if you were back on that where it was fluctuating and you knocked out those species and just went backwards further. You'd be back to bare ground pretty quick.
And this is another slide. I've sort of been picking up slides around the place. I don't like the rotational grazing word there, I must admit, but you know, this idea that you can build soil. I've probably watched Elaine Ingham's presentation, which was on the newsletter this week, probably about 3 or 4 times, and Dad and I have discussed it several times through on the weekend, just different aspects of it. And this idea, you know, people tell you, oh, the soil, it's always going to be that way, but this idea that you can build soil really fascinates me. And Jason, we were talking about this, you know, when folks go to workshops that are put on by, you know, people who should know better, that they sort of suggest to you, oh, you've got D-class land, and when the farmer says, oh, what can I do about that, there's sort of no hope, nothing you can really do about it. But I think that this is just, you know, magnificent that we can offer something, hope, to landholders to say, hey, look, there is something, you can actually change the soil that you've got. And this is Elaine's idea, that the aggregates in the soil actually build, well, it stores carbon, it holds water, but it also makes minerals in the soil available to the plant. So it's a sideways view of the root. So the thing that looks like a brick wall, I don't know if you can see my pointer when I point to it here, but it looks like a brick wall on the bottom. That's actually the root, and it's magnified by a lot of times. And then you've got here, we've got the root hair. And then you've got these little filaments, which are called hyphae. I think they are fungi, I think, that exist with the roots. And then you've got the aggregate, which is that process there that is building the way that the soil sits together. So a nice soil, it always crumbles and sort of sticks together a bit, and that carbon in the soil there is stored right next to the root mass, and that is what is building the soil. So if you can get more of those roots in your soil, I just think it's magic that you can say to people, look, you know, yeah, tragedy might have happened, as Jeff says, on your land, but you know, you can come back from that. You can actually, you know, do something that will be good for your soil, and that's the most amazing thing about this sort of stuff to me, is that, you know, you can come back from that, and quite quickly too. I think, Jeff, you had results within only a couple of years. It's not like you have to wait for nature. Elaine says, oh, nature waits for 100 years. Oh, 100 years, 1,000 years. Doesn't matter how long I wait. But for humans, we want production now. We want, you know, we want wool or wheat or whatever it is within the next 12 months because we've got a mortgage or whatever. And it's just fascinating to me, this whole process, and it's quite new. And Brian alluded it to us last week, and thanks, Brian, for pointing that out to us, because it's been a really interesting you know, learning experience for Dad and I, at least, you know, going back through Elaine's slides and watching what she had to say a few times. Jason, have I got the hyphae right?
Look, Judith, I have to say I'm happy to confess I've got not much of an understanding of soil science and how the interaction of plant materials and fungi and biology work. But the fact of the matter is, you know, we need organic matter in the soil, and that organic matter has to be a mix of plant material and animal material. And when I say animal material, I'm talking about all the little animals that live in the soil, from microscopic things up to earthworms and ants. And, you know, that's the only way we can kickstart and move the soil to be something that's living again. And you're so right when you say that a lot of people in ag extension are saying, oh, well, when it's a C and a D class landscape, we can't do much to change it, and even when it's a B, we can probably only keep it at a B. Well, that's wrong. We know of people in Australia, and we know of people in other parts of the world that have changed the way they manage above the soil. They've changed the way they manage the plants and the animals that are above the soil on their farm, and that has a huge effect on what happens below the soil. You know, I can't control what happens under the soil surface, but I can control what happens on top. And you can throw as many paper dollars and as many mineral dollars and as much diesel and heavy metal as you like at the problem of bare and desertifying landscapes, and it will just not work. It is unsustainable in the long term. The only thing we can do is use plants and animals to grow more plants on soil, change the community dynamics, change the water cycle, change the mineral cycle, and kick-start things. You know, there's just no other way, and the only way we can keep that soil improving is by continually putting more organic matter into it. And the only way we can do that is by growing organic matter ourselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think one of the, just from memory, one of the things about the D-class country or the D-class thing was you needed some machinery or reseeding or ploughing or something. That was one of the classifications in D-type country. And, you know, there's so many experiments and so many places out there where we've seen that just proven so wrong. So that D-class country, and I remember having cattle once on some A-class country, what they called A-class country, but it was over-rested, and that lignified the grass to the cattle that needed. They would have died on it. So yeah, I think it's got hairs on it, the A, B, C, and D start classification actually.
Okay, the other thing that I was thinking about was this guy Tony Lavelle. He's actually just out past Charleville, and he hasn't actually made contact with me yet, but I might actually seek him out one day. But he's got a very interesting TED talk about that process that you can actually build. So the more soil cover you've got, the more water you've got, the more microbes you've got. The more microbes you've got, the more grass you grow, and you know, essentially more profit for you as well. So that's a great talk. I might put it on the newsletter for people to have a listen to anyway, because he talks a lot of numbers and facts, but it is interesting to listen to his ideas. And he was very good friends with one of the guys that passed. Jeff, who was that?
Bruce Ward.
Bruce Ward, yeah.
Yeah, Bruce Ward. He was working with Bruce, I think. Yeah. There's probably a couple of things, Judith, I'm sorry for butting in, just crossing my mind here. And one is, like we got Jason there today, and we'd just like a bit of feedback, or to Judith, some feedback on, you know, we just experiment with these webinars and stuff, and we're just calling them a study group, and just where we might go with them. But we'll seem to be heading towards the idea of having someone on every week, someone fresh, someone new, bring more contacts on. So any feedback on that. And the other thing that I've just want to mention, and it probably mightn't be the right time, Judith, I'm butting in, I know, but with Alan Savory taking over that place up north, I'd really like to try and document some of the stuff he's doing up there, and put it all on sort of YouTube videos or etc. I know they had the cyclone go through there, and they got a lot of big timber knocked down, so he's sort of trying to get a bit of that together and making a biochar thing at the moment. And even just that recorded, he's bringing in a fellow from America to put these 6,000 head of cattle together and start moving them around, and even that recorded. So we'd like a bit of feedback on that, whether you think that would be worthwhile, just I mainly guess as an advertising tool for the hub or for someone to do the training, etc. So you please just flick Judith an email if you've got someone that you might like that we could approach to bring on, and let us know about whether you think it would be worth trying to make some little short YouTube videos that we could have, mainly just for advertising, because I think the way we are trying to operate here, I always believe in the 20-80 rule. I think 20% of the people may have done the training, may be interested in doing the training, and we'll go home and take something on, probably not quite 20%, but we really want to work with the other 80% and put it on farm, on learning on farm, etc., and just grassroots type stuff. We're not here to make money, we run it through a community sort of group, and any feedback would be great, because we haven't been getting much feedback. This is the third week, and we just would really appreciate a bit of feedback on some of that stuff. Thanks, Judith.
Yeah, that's great. The next two slides are from Elaine Ingham's work, and I discussed this with Jeff earlier last week actually, and I discussed this with Dad, and they weren't so convinced, but the thing that runs through my mind is I've read a lot of Pat Colby's work having sheep and looking at nutrition and breeding, and the first thing about nutrition and breeding is that you need a lot of nutrient, and one thing that she was on about was that a lot of forests, they have 100% fungi, and she was of course adding, I think, lime to the ground, but she would come in and bring tons of lime, and I think that's probably okay down south perhaps, but where we've got 2,800 hectares, it's not really viable for us. But the thing about this is the balance of the microbes in the soil and what that has, or what that does for what grows. So over on the left-hand side, this is 100% bacteria, and this is what happens when you've got bare ground and then you have a big rain event, a lot of water, and then the things that like that 100% bacteria and not a lot of fungi, they're the weeds and those sort of things. And then you have this process of succession as you go over towards the right-hand side. And it's actually a process by the bacteria and the fungi in the environment. So the more you go over towards trees, the more fungi is in the environment. So it is that process in the soil of all those microbes interacting. And this is another one of Elaine's slides. And so it looks at succession, and she was asked she says, you know, why is it that everything doesn't go into a forest? Well, she said you have things like volcanoes up the top there in the purple will take you back through the process. A flood will take you back through the process, a fire, and then you've got humans down the bottom, question mark. Which way does it go, I think is what. And you've also got cattle, and the disturbance of grazing animals cause this disruption as well, so it takes it back through the succession. And this is the first time I've seen anyone suggest this, and it's interesting to me because everyone says, you know, it's tree planting day, and I don't know whether you realise, but on Sunday, well, last week we planted trees, and people say to me, well, that's just a slap in the face to us guys out here because this country grows more trees. And so this process of trying to, I guess, keep the succession back and to keep it into usable pasture, because what happens if you use fire is that you end up having to, feed, and then you end up having this process of the bushes will come back quite quickly. So within 5 years you'll have to make some sort of intervention in our kind of country to stop the bushes from encroaching again. And I just wonder if on our learning site we're going to be having anything the way that we're grazing now, and that we're mob grazing. So we'll need to keep a lot of photos, obviously, but to work out if you can actually hold it or you can manage it within that pasture area and sort of stop some of your more sandalwood growing back and things like that. So Jeff's had some discussion. I don't know what you think of this sort of slide, Jason. It's kind of stuff that I come into contact with as I'm reflecting.
Oh, look, Judith, it's, you know, I'm in no position to argue with someone of the calibre of Elaine because I just don't know. But I can see why. I can see her thinking coming through on when you have an activity like a volcanic eruption or a flood or a fire, that it certainly does retard the community that was there immediately before that event occurred. I'm a bit disappointed she hasn't added an arrow rather than just a question mark to humans, because it's pretty plain to me what happens when humans get into a landscape. And you know, depending on what happens on your piece of land, do you want it to succeed to a forest? Do you want it to be a forest of bushes or a forest of deciduous trees? Well, you know, I haven't been to Mitchell, but I know that there's not too many deciduous trees out there. Nor do we want it to go back to bare parent material or a landscape highly populated by bacteria. So I don't know whether when Elaine's put this slide together that she has drawn a distinction between the way we talk about managing grazing animals in the landscape, or she's just drawn cattle with the arrow based on her experience of the way most other people manage grazing animals in a landscape.
Yeah, I think you touched on it there, Jace. I think you really touched on it there. Well, it depends what we want. And this is a perfect slide to lead into our next, probably the tools. But it depends where we sit on the middle of the scale. It depends on your holistic goal. We used to call it holistic context. So it depends on your holistic context. If you want a forest, if you're managing for a forest, you'd manage it differently. But most of the graziers and people that we're probably dealing with, they do want to stay at the grazing level. So if that's our context, that's our holistic context, we want at the grazing level. We manage the best for perennial plants, and we try to suppress it moving forward into that. And we've only got those tools to use. Sometimes fire. Like in the next program, the next part of the session, we'll learn that all tools, none's good, none's bad. You know, they're all equal. We just use them in the way that they work, and they work differently in where you are in the environment. On the brittle scale, etc., they predict and work differently. And Alan's always on about, you may be wrong, so just monitor and make sure you're moving in the right direction.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
Yeah. It's a good slide, Judith. You know, it just goes to bring up, I think, leads perfectly into the next thing. The community dynamics is great. I don't know if we've got anything on the pyramid type stuff, Judith, or is that have we covered them all now, the 4 ecosystem processes, or have we got more to go?
No, so there is the pyramid. I'm getting to that.
Yeah. I was just thinking that leads perfectly into the next session. Yeah.
Okay. So Horton Hears a Who is just all about, well, it comes from this book by Judith Swartz, which I've read about 3 or 4 times now. And Horton Hears a Who, my son loved it when he was younger, and it's all about this elephant, and he discovers that there's all these small beings that live that he never knew about, and he tries to save them. It's essentially the line, but Judith Swartz talks about it in terms of, you know, we're unaware mostly of what happens below the soil. And so the next slide, you know, who actually lives in the soil. So this is, you know, something that eats roots, and it eats aerobic bacteria, and it doesn't eat anaerobic bacteria. So it like humans shapes its own environment by, you know, what it likes and what it doesn't eat. So those 3 slides kind of fit together. We haven't done the mineral cycle yet. And that's what Jeff and I were discussing, because we're not really, the mineral cycle is referred to as cycling of nutrients from plants to other organisms to soils and back to plants. The green dark plant colour is an indicator of a healthy mineral cycle. And then I stole a very simple diagram of the carbon cycle. And, you know, general greenhouse theory tells us that it's the actual use of these fossil fuels at the bottom of the process here that is causing a problem, and perhaps it is, but the most important thing for landholders is the use of this, you know, where you've got this bare soil. So this is American slide, but you see a lot of bare soil like that out this way, particularly when it's not raining, and that's a whole lot of oxidizing carbon coming off the bare soil there, going up into the environment. So, you know, the thing I was thinking about here really was, you know, that the human race, we're part of the environment, and the only thing that we sort of get caught up in is we stop these cycles from happening within the earth. These processes, they're all there, you know, none of the CO2 in the environment. It's all going to be with Earth. Nothing leaves and nothing enters pretty much over long periods of time. So it's all here. It's just how we process it. And what happens is at the moment is there's a little bit too much CO2 in the atmosphere, but we can actually store that through that process in the soil, and that's something that you know, becomes more and more clear to me. And I think that's my take on the mineral cycle anyway. And that the most important thing for the mineral cycle is to keep that that ground covered. So when you've got the ground covered, and this is something that I thought of when I was coming back from Zimbabwe, was just, you know, the main message is just to keep the ground covered. It retains moisture, it builds the soil, and it creates the life. So that's the mineral cycle and we're getting to the energy cycle, which is the part that Jeff's getting very interested in. So this is the energy flow pyramid that you would have been quite familiar with, and but Jeff and I have been having fair few discussions about another type of pyramid, which is this one here, which has the soil surface and how much you can actually create. So how much life you can create depends on how much you can get in this area between the A, B and the C. And that's directly from the course material that's shot. It's from one of the videos out of the course material. So, Jeff?
Great, Judith. Yeah, I was probably thinking of another pyramid, but anyway, this one's great. That just goes to show at each level, I think we lose a bit of energy as it goes through the process. I think going back to the mineral cycle, I'm like you. I see, and Jason might put us straight on this. I see it the same as the carbon cycle, basically. Only just includes all minerals that cycle through plants or trees or through growth, etc. Come through the soil, back into the atmosphere, or wherever it goes, and then back. It's just a cycle system through plants and animals. The other pyramid I was discussing, it should probably come in later on after this, is a four-sided pyramid like that, with these four ecosystems on each side, and the bottom of it being a flat plain. Yeah, the next one, but just thinking of it as being not underground at this stage. And the bottom of the four-sided pyramid just being the ecosystem, not the whole planet, I guess, but with that being that environment, the ecosystem of that environment which we're in, and these four processes where energy flow, succession, water cycle and mineral cycle being on the other side. And in the book, or in the course, I think mainly he described it as looking at the same thing through a window, the four sides. So they're all related, and you can't increase one without increasing the other. Like we can't increase the water cycle without increasing the mineral cycle, and that also affects succession and energy flow. So they're all very closely related, and they make up the let's call it the ecosystem for that environment at the bottom. So they're both, the whole diversity of the ecosystem on the bottom can only be as big as the most limiting side. So if we increase one, we have to really increase the whole four. They're very closely related. We're sort of talking about the same thing overall, looking at it through different windows, I guess. And that was what I was thinking of when I was discussing with Judith about the other four-sided pyramid. I'm not sure if that made sense, Judith, but that's just the way I sort of seen it somewhere in a book years ago, and I described it well to me, that's all. And they're all looking at the same thing, although they're different processes, but we're looking at the whole ecosystem processes through different windows. And we can't increase one. The bottom of the plane, what it sits on, will always be flat, and the total ecosystem for that area, or the total diversity in that area, and they're all closely related.
Yeah, so that finishes up the section on the four cycles quite well, and in the book he does talk about it as four windows into a room, and so different ways of looking at the same thing. So Jason, I guess you're familiar with the four windows into the same room, and you use that quite regularly.
Yeah, Judith, that's when we're talking about it in training, it's the way you use to highlight what we're talking about. It's very, very difficult. It's actually impossible in a natural setting for us to expand one of those faces of the pyramid without expanding the others. It just doesn't work. I mean, you can do it on a golf course, with lots of mineral dollars and lots of petroleum energy and that sort of thing, but that's an unnatural environment. The only way we can grow the effectiveness of one of the ecosystem processes is to grow all four of them at the same time. It's, you know, nature is not lopsided. It's only lopsided because of the things we've been doing for our own desires that make it lopsided.
Yeah, so it's a whole. Comes back to holism, doesn't it?
Holes within holes, yeah.
Yeah. Thanks very much, Jason. That I think that explains it quite well. I'm understanding it quite well. Where does it come from? That particular, is that from the training materials, or is that in the workbook, or is that too difficult a question to answer right now?
No, I'm pretty sure Alan's covered it in the textbook, because we use this example of a tetrahedron, and I've got two big four-sided pyramids and two small four-sided pyramids, and I just like to use them. They're made out of cardboard, and I just use them in training to highlight from a different point of view, rather than the four windows looking in at the same thing. This is another way you can highlight that if we expand the number of plants, for argument's sake, in a landscape, that will naturally increase the amount of energy flow that we can harvest. It will naturally increase the amount of community dynamics that we have in that environment, and it will naturally increase the mineral cycle in that environment, because it's all grown in tandem.
Yeah.
It's you know, it's folly. I can understand why people want a nice looking tennis court or a nice looking golf course, but you know, you can pump heaps of energy to make a golf course look good, but we want a simplified environment of Bermuda couch, and we don't want lots and lots of wildlife. We want everything very simple, but we want it to look nice. Well, you know, nature doesn't function that way. If things look really nice in nature, it's because all four of these processes are
Just gone off there, I think.
working at the same pace, or relatively at the same pace, or at the same speed. Things get...
Yeah, we're losing you a bit, Jason.
You there, Jeff?
Yeah.
Oh, that's okay, sorry.
We heard most of
so
it.
yeah, the whole four of them do function together.
Yes, that's the point, I think. Yeah, we just lost you there, but I think we got the point. Thanks, Jason. That was great.
Yeah, so is it Alan's idea that you can actually just focus on that base of it, which is increasing the soil cover, and if that is what you're mostly looking at, then you will then by default or by definition increase the rest of the biodiversity, the mineral cycle and the water cycle. Do you think that is what he's getting at in that?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's even on, like Jason was talking about, the golf course or the lawn, I think that pyramid still works, but it's limited. A couple of the other sides are limited, so the base is shrunk right back to the most limiting factor, you know, even though we're pouring a lot of energy or whatever, or a lot of water onto it. It's not functioning well in other areas, so it's the base, the ecosystem is simplified and shrunk right back to being small. That's the way I see it.
Mm. Is that correct, Jason, or have we got the wrong idea?
No, look, I think let's think about it in terms of your piece of land at Mitchell. Okay, it's what we would call a brittle tending environment. You know, we need to be very specific in how we manage that landscape if we wish to grow more plants, if we wish to harvest more sunlight, if we wish more water to soak into the soil, and if we wish to increase the soil biology and the amount of life in the soil. We need to understand how that landscape functions, and people seem to forget that that's where it all came from with Alan. He's very, very concerned, and has been for a long time, about those brittle tending parts of the world, those Zimbabwe, Western Queensland, Central Australia. He's concerned about those parts of the world that function extremely differently from the wet parts of the world. You know, we have this very short wet season and a very long dry season, and the way life functions in those, you know, we know how it functions before humans came along, and we can see it functioning now that we've been here trying to manage it for 200 years. So in those brittle tending parts of the world, the key is having a soil that is covered, soil that doesn't ever get touched by sunlight, and it's hosting a very wide variety of plants, some of which grow all year, some of which are seasonal, and keeping a huge bulk of growing plants and organic litter covering the soil all the time. And if we can do that in your landscape, and we saw that, Judith, from that photo that you put up at the very beginning, the landscape very close to where you took the photo, there was oxidising plants and bare soil, and then further away we saw a beautiful stand of green growing plants. So, you know, I know you can do this in your landscape because there's recent photographic evidence of that happening.
Yeah.
If we want to improve that soil in the foreground, what have we got to do to change the conditions of the soil surface in the foreground of that photo? Well, we need to have more growing plants. We need litter covering the soil all the time, and nature will want to spring back. As Brian Marshall says, it's this compressed spring. Nature wants to grow and wants to be far more dynamic than it is in some parts of the world. It's just our behaviour that's stopping it happening.
Yeah. So Brian's written me a comment, sorry, Steph. He's written me quite a long comment. Sadly, the tree is seen as a pinnacle of biodiversity. Grasslands can be just as diverse, but land has to move. The grasslands can be just as diverse, but land has to move below the soil where we generally don't look. A figure I have from the prairies is for every tonne of animal has to be 18 tonnes of just earthworms to support that biodiversity. So, yeah, Brian's suggesting, I think that when we were looking at that below the soil, that the pyramid is bigger on the bottom, and that is indicated here, I think, by the orange living roots and all of these sort of things. You can see that the pyramid's actually much bigger below the line of the soil surface. Sorry, Jeff, I probably made you lose your train of thought.
No, that's fine, and it's good to come back to that slide. Thanks, Brian. Thanks for that. Because yeah, it was a little bit hard, but that's great. I've read a lot about that stuff, and even the ants and stuff in some communities way more than the cattle on the land. You know, it's amazing the diversity in soil, and something that we've haven't really come to understand, and probably will never understand. That's why we need to change our thinking, change our way we deal with it, and that's what the holistic approach is about. Because the human brain just probably can't handle the complexity and the diversity and the relationships between all these microbial stuff, and not only microbial, the big animals as well.
Yeah.
So I think this leads perfectly into the next session, which is about tools and where we sit on the brittleness scale, depending how we use these few tools. Fire being one, and grazing, rest, of course. So it'll be interesting to go through that and have the discussion with you. Please remember, I'd love Judith to get a bit of feedback on this. We're open to change. As we say, it's just a study group, and please give us some feedback or who you'd like to see on or what you'd like to see us cover. But otherwise, we'll just continue to work through the program. Judith and I are both doing it online, and we enjoy sharing ideas together. And I'm sure the more people, the more brain power we get out there, the more ideas we'll have, and just continue to learn. No one pretends to know it all. It's just a learning program, that's all.
Yeah, my final comment was something that Jason brought up earlier, which was this idea of looking at the land, whether it's this way, you know, getting on your knees and pointing at it. And when we did the monitoring, you know, we got down on our knees. Here we are, you know, pointing at one of the darts in some soil there, looking at what actually is growing there. And that's really where the most of the thinking that, you know, I find, you know, farmers really do. And that's something that we would like to really get to through this process, is having some really on-farm kind of linking. And when we first talked about how this is going to work for the hub, we talked about this webinar sort of idea, but then also how do we get that on-farm experience. And so what we would like to do at the end of this is also to have a bit of a link out. And one of the problems is Gavin's over there in Western Australia, and you know, we're probably not going to be able to afford to fly him over so he can join us. So we haven't got a good idea of how to include you know, people that join us from afar and from week to week, people join me from Victoria and New South Wales as well. So one of the, you can have a local group that we might go out and actually kneel on the soil and look at the capping. And, here we're looking at the capping, we're looking at how many insects are there, we're looking at how much has fallen on the ground and how much water movement's there, and is there any pillaring. And that's really key, I think, to this understanding, and you really should do more of that. And my final thought was, Brian got us onto reading Should Meat Be on the Menu by David Mason Jones, which is a very interesting book, because my dad was thinking about how much, minerals we send off. He's saying, oh, we send off minerals every year. We send off all these bales of wool every year. And he was absolutely brought to his knees, I think, when Brian just sort of laughed and said, oh, well, what actually is in that wool? How many minerals do you send off to your wool? And we've been challenged a few times to work out, whether it's beef or whether it's wheat or whatever it is, what actually do you send off? So in wool, we send off 33% keratin, which is what your nails and hair are made of, which is pretty much essentially carbon. I think it's funny that there's 26% dirt that we send off with our wool, and 28% suet, which is what you know as a lanolin, 12% fat, and actually only 1% of minerals, and most of that is actually sulfur. So my parting thought is the next time someone comes out and says, you should put some chemicals on your or minerals on your farm, you need this mineral or that mineral or whatever because you send a lot of it away. Remember what you send away, and in our situation we send at least 33% carbon away, a whole lot of dirt and some lanolin. Thanks very much, guys, for listening. I know it's a long time, really. I hope that you get something out of it. I certainly get something out of it because every week I'm forced to find more things, I discover more things, and I review the course notes and learn things that I had not before. Jason, thanks very much for being on the call with us. I think your insight's been invaluable for today, and we really appreciate taking some time out, and we really welcome having you in the group. And I know Brian's been sitting there as an observer, being very patient with me. And Jeff, thanks very much for coming in and having some comments as well. I think if we opened it all up so everyone can comment, we'd just ruin the bandwidth. Is my only thing. There's other people here and they probably would like to speak, but perhaps we can invite you on one at a time, week by week, and do it that way. So that's it for this week, guys. Jeff, any comments?
No, thank you very much, Judith. I quite enjoyed it, and it does motivate me. I'm just going through it at home online and stuff. But I love to get in and chat with other people on it, and I appreciate Jason being there. Appreciated Brian being there again. Thank you very much, Brian. And look forward to next week.
Hey, Jason, any final comment?
Look, Judith, thanks. I think you folks are doing a wonderful job out there, and it was so heartening to hear that your focus is on the 80% of people that most of the spruikers in the industry are not focused on. It's a thing the few of our educator group is working on at the moment. How do we move people from gaining new knowledge to actually acting on that and changing behaviour? So it's so heartening to see that there's other people out there on the same page as us, and as always, it's just delightful to be talking with people that are serious about wanting to change things at the soil surface, because that's where all the change has to happen.
All right, and that's a wrap. Thank you very much, and good afternoon to you all. I'll talk with you later.